What will happen to Donald Trump if Japan denies his $550 billion deal claims? Donald Trump has always thrived on spectacle, bold claims, inflated numbers, and deals that sound too good to be true. But when Japan steps forward and flatly denies his staggering claim of a $550 billion trade deal, the spectacle turns into something far more dangerous: a credibility crisis. For years, Trump has sold himself as the ultimate deal maker, the man who bends world leaders to his will. Now, with Japan openly rejecting his narrative, that image begins to unravel. Is this just another example of Trump inflating reality for political gain? Or does it mark a turning point where allies refuse to play along with his theatrics? The implications stretch far beyond Tokyo, reaching into America's global standing, trade negotiations, and Trump's political future. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. The story unfolding around Donald Trump's claim of a massive $550 billion deal with Japan strikes at the very heart of his political brand. For years, Trump has presented himself as the master negotiator, the businessman president who could extract riches from allies and adversaries alike through sheer force of will. Yet the reality now being reported paints the opposite picture. Major world leaders are not rushing to do business with him. They are actively avoiding him. The transcript shows us a White House plagued by cancellations, by unanswered phone calls, by diplomats who simply do not want to be associated with Trump. Japan's sudden decision to cancel meetings after Trump boasted of an extravagant windfall is the most visible example of this phenomenon. If Japan publicly denies his claims and distances itself from Trump, the consequences will not be confined to Tokyo and Washington. They will ripple through the international system, through America's alliances, and into the domestic political scene, where Trump's reputation as a deal maker has long been central to his appeal. The transcript makes clear that Japan's trade negotiators, led by Akazawa, canceled scheduled meetings with the United States after Trump misrepresented the supposed terms of a deal. According to Trump, Japan had agreed to deliver an upfront payment of $550 billion, hand over 90% of profits, and essentially subordinate its economy to America. Japan immediately denied that such an agreement ever existed. Their position was that at most there were discussions of high-interest discretionary loans that Tokyo could choose to offer, not binding commitments and certainly not a signing bonus. This distinction is not minor. It means that Trump publicly announced a deal that his counterpart insists does not exist. If Japan now formally denies Trump's version, the credibility of his entire negotiating record is thrown into doubt. His claim of victory becomes an obvious fabrication. For a president who thrives on the image of commanding respect abroad, being contradicted so directly by one of America's closest allies would be devastating. The Japanese cancellation also highlights a broader diplomatic backlash. Trump's Oval Office comments with the president of South Korea further offended Tokyo, showing once again his inability to handle the nuance of regional politics. For Japan, already cautious about appearing too submissive to Washington, the risk of being publicly humiliated by Trump's exaggerations outweighed the benefits of further engagement. Akazawa's refusal to attend was a clear signal. Tokyo would not legitimize Trump's narrative by participating in staged meetings designed to inflate his reputation. Japan is not alone in turning away from the Trump White House. The transcript provides striking examples of other leaders refusing contact. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a figure who previously engaged with Washington to build long-term economic ties, has repeatedly declined Trump's phone calls. Modi reportedly ignored multiple attempts by Trump to arrange discussions, citing past insults, escalating tariffs, and the perception that Trump favored Pakistan because of financial ties to his family's ventures. India, one of the fastest-growing economies in the world, has little incentive to expose itself to further humiliation. By ghosting Trump, Modi protects his domestic standing and signals that India will not be treated as a bargaining chip. Ukraine offers another revealing case. Valery Zaluzhny, the former chief of staff of Ukraine's armed forces and later envoy to the United Kingdom, allegedly refused J.D. Vance's overtures to orchestrate a coup against President Zelensky. Instead of cooperating, he informed European allies of the American approach, reinforcing Ukraine's alignment with Europe rather than Trump's White House. His public remarks that the United States under Trump was trying to destroy the world order underline just how toxic the administration had become in the eyes of partners fighting for survival against Russian aggression. Denmark, too, has expressed outrage. Reports that Trump's administration sent spies into Greenland to explore ways to seize the territory fueled suspicions that the United States was willing to treat allies as adversaries. Copenhagen summoned American envoys to demand explanations. These stories collectively illustrate a pattern. America under Trump is being avoided, not courted. Leaders from Asia to Europe are increasingly unwilling to grant him the legitimacy that comes with diplomatic engagement. Among all these examples, Japan's potential denial of Trump's claims stands out. Unlike India or Ukraine, Japan is a formal treaty ally under the U.S. security umbrella. The United States bases tens of thousands of troops on Japanese soil. The bilateral relationship has been a cornerstone of American strategy in Asia since World War II. For such a close ally to directly contradict Trump's statements would reveal a dramatic collapse of trust. Furthermore, Trump has long cited Japan as proof of his deal-making prowess. On the campaign trail and in office, he framed Tokyo as an example of a country that once took advantage of America, but was now forced to pay tribute under his leadership. The idea of extracting $550 billion fed perfectly into his populist narrative that America could regain wealth by demanding more from allies. If Japan discredits that story, it exposes Trump's rhetoric as empty. Supporters who admired his ability to bully foreign leaders into submission would confront evidence that the bullying was imaginary. The denial also undermines Trump's economic arguments. He has portrayed himself as a defender of American workers against unfair trade practices, using tariffs as leverage to secure better deals. Yet if allies are not actually paying what he claims, then the tariffs appear not as a negotiating tool, but as reckless provocations that drive partners away. Japan's cancellation illustrates how these tactics backfire, costing the United States credibility and potentially economic opportunities. Domestically, Trump has always tied his legitimacy to his business persona. The art of the deal was more than a book title. It was a brand promise. If Japan denies his claim, critics will have concrete evidence that Trump fabricates achievements. The narrative of being the world's greatest negotiator collapses under the weight of contradiction. Political opponents will highlight the discrepancy relentlessly. Media outlets will replay Trump's speeches about the deal next to Japan's official denial, hammering home the perception that he cannot be trusted. For his base, this creates a dilemma. Many supporters admire Trump not because they believe in traditional conservative ideology, but because they believe he wins. He dominates opponents, humiliates elites, and secures concessions. If instead he is revealed to be ignored by allies and lied to by his own team, that aura of dominance evaporates. The risk is that his following begins to fracture between those who cling to the mythology and those who cannot ignore the evidence. Congressional Republicans also face challenges. Members who defended Trump's trade policies will struggle to justify their support if the deals turn out to be fictional. The credibility of figures like Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who promised written agreements that never materialized, will be questioned. Political rivals within the Republican Party will seize the opportunity to brand Trump as reckless and incompetent. Beyond domestic politics, Japan's denial has serious implications for America's role in the international system. The United States depends on trust and credibility to maintain its alliances. If allies believe that Trump invents deals for political gain, they will be less willing to engage in sensitive negotiations. This reduces America's influence at precisely the moment when China is expanding its reach through initiatives like the Belt and Road. The transcript also highlights how other powers are filling the vacuum. Modi is reportedly preparing to meet Xi Jinping at a summit hosted by China. Europe is consolidating its own centers of power, with leaders like Mark Carney engaging with Scandinavian and German counterparts. Meanwhile, the BRICS bloc is gaining cohesion. If the United States is isolated, sidelined from key discussions, it will find itself unable to shape the emerging order. Japan's public denial would accelerate this trend. It would signal to other countries that it is acceptable, even advantageous, to distance themselves from Trump's America. This could lead to a cascading effect where more nations refuse meetings, avoid calls, and seek alternative partnerships. The risk is not only the decline of American leadership, but also the fragmentation of the Western alliance structure that has underpinned global stability for decades. To understand the stakes, it is useful to compare Trump's situation to historical precedents. American presidents have long relied on personal credibility to secure international agreements. Franklin Roosevelt's relationship with Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan's rapport with Mikhail Gorbachev, or even George W. Bush's ties with European leaders in the aftermath of September 11th were built on trust. When that trust existed, deals could be reached that reshaped the world order. Trump, by contrast, undermines trust by exaggerating or fabricating agreements. Japan's denial echoes earlier episodes when leaders distanced themselves from him, such as when Mexico refuted his claims about funding a border wall. Each time this happens, it chips away at the perception that he commands respect. The cumulative effect is the erosion of the very brand he built. If history is a guide, presidents who lose credibility abroad often suffer politically at home. Lyndon Johnson's collapse during the Vietnam War or Jimmy Carter's struggles after the Iran hostage crisis demonstrate how foreign policy failures can accelerate domestic decline. For Trump, being caught inflating achievements could have similar consequences. Looking forward, Japan's denial raises strategic risks for American foreign policy. Negotiations over trade, security, and technology depend on confidence that commitments will be honored. If Trump is perceived as unreliable, allies may hedge by diversifying their partnerships. Japan could increase cooperation with regional partners like South Korea or Australia, or even explore cautious engagement with China to avoid overdependence on the United States. For America, this would mean reduced leverage in shaping Asia's economic and security architecture. The possibility that NATO could weaken, as suggested by Valery Zaluzhny, becomes more real if Asian alliances also fray. America's isolation would embolden adversaries such as Russia and China. The failure of diplomacy, symbolized by Japan's canceled meeting, would thus have cascading effects on global security. If Japan officially denies Donald Trump's $550 billion deal claims, the fallout will be severe across multiple dimensions. Diplomatically, it will confirm that key allies no longer trust or respect him. Politically, it will shatter the image of Trump as a master negotiator, undermining one of the pillars of his appeal. Strategically, it will weaken America's alliances and open the door for rivals to expand their influence. The central irony is that Trump, who built his brand on winning deals, may be remembered instead for losing credibility. Japan's cancellation and denial symbolize the broader rejection he faces from leaders around the world. Instead of commanding respect, he is increasingly ghosted, sidelined, and contradicted. The question is not only what happens to Trump's political fortunes if Japan denies his claims, but what happens to America's role in the world when its leader is seen as unreliable.